this one, every once in a while I get really excited for a class, and this one I am really excited with because I've played in this field, but I've never really jumped in. So I'm looking personally at jumping into this subject. So this is really exciting. And we're talking about moon gardening. Ooh, connecting to the universe, that interconnectedness of everything just really excites me. Hello, I'm Terry Meir, and I'll be your host today. We're proud to provide these free classes every week to help us connect us all to our regenerative ecosystem. You can learn more about our project at sustainablekashi.com. If you have any questions today, please type them in the chat box and we'll try and get them all answered for you. Today, we're talking about moon gardening. And we are so proud and so happy to have Chantal Lemoine with us. She's a retired physician and a moon gardener. We found Chantal through a video made by our friend Rob Greenfield in collaboration with the organization's Humans Who Grow Food. She has plans to design and install urban permaculture gardens, teaching moon gardening and utilizing her garden space to build community. We're so inspired by her community moon garden project that we reached out and asked her to come and join us today, and she agreed to do a class for us. So welcome, Chantal, and thank you for sharing your passion with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'm thrilled to talk about one of my passions. So I have a PowerPoint presentation, and we can get to the slides and get started. So I'm a retired physician and a moon gardener. And this is where you can find me at themoongardener.com and on IG at themoongardener. Next. So what exactly is a moon gardener? What I do not do is really look at the moon phases other than to admire them. But I don't plant by the new moon or the full moon. What I do is a combination of biodynamic gardening, which was developed by Rudolf Steiner and Maria Thun, and biointensive or French gardening, which came to the United States through Alan Chadwick at UC Santa Cruz. And I've also included principles of permaculture, as well as the square inch or square foot gardening methods to try and get as much yield as possible out of my garden. Next. So this all, I'm giving you just a little bit of names so you can see this developed over from the early 1900s, but it's based on centuries and centuries of farmers observing things. Rudolf Steiner was really a philosopher, but the farmers around him were having difficulties with their crops, and they actually went to him and asked for his help because they admired his way of integrating things, and he agreed to help them and turned his attention to their farming practices and went back and resuscitated some of the ancient farming practices, and the results were so impressive that this method was adapted. It spread to France and into the suburbs of cities, which developed this market gardening, and so in France, the practice of moon gardening is very established. It's established. They've got a whole site dedicated to it, which because I happen to do some internet searches in French, I stumbled upon, and that's where I got my start. So this is my journey. I was practicing rheumatology pretty happily. I mean, not without stress, but because the life of a physician and mother is not an easy one. But I don't think I would have veered from that path if it hadn't been for the fact that I got really ill. I had a series of falls, and it's a long history because it started at age 12, but eventually I developed a tumor inside my spine, and the surgery to get that tumor out really wrecked my back and left me with severe chronic pain. And so I became very, very depressed. I couldn't practice anymore. I became addicted to narcotics, well, dependent or addicted. The line is so thin. And I lived basically from one pill to the next, or one nerve block to the next. And I was pretty much laying down most of the time and getting up just for short periods of time just to do little tasks. I could not even stand up for the whole time it would take to put a meal together in the kitchen. I had to break all my activities down into 10-minute periods of, activity, and go lie down and rest. And in the midst of all this madness, there was this undeniable urge. Something said to me, you must get up and go and garden. And it was completely, I'd always wanted to garden, but I'd always wanted a pretty garden with some flowers. I'd never wanted to be a farmer. But all of a sudden, I'm laying in bed, reading trashy novels and watching videos to just pass the time, waiting for the time for my next pill. And something says to me, you must get up and go and do this. I tried every way that I could to get other people to help me do it, and nobody ever came. But finally, I yielded to the urge. By that time, I had neglected my garden so much that everything out there was dead. Okay. My house looked like nobody lived in it. It looked like a deserted house. That's how bad things had gotten. And I'm talking about a few years of really pretty deep depression. And eventually I yielded in. I went out there and started my first little patch, and it got me better. I remembered that I had this little stool. I went out and started to garden. I felt better, and I got a garden. It happened twice within a year and a half. And both times coincided with planting season in LA. We have two planting seasons. One is winter, fall gardening for cool vegetables. And then the spring gardening, you plant all your warm weather, the lovers. And so you have a nice, 3-month season where you can harvest all your tomatoes and peppers and things like that. So both times after that happened the second time, I was like, this is a coincidence. Why I'm feeling this urge at the right time, just by coincidence. So I decided that I would look into it. And that's how I stumbled. I said, it's got to do something with the moon, So I stumbled upon the Rustica site. And I have a niece who lives in France, and I asked her to send me some books, and she sent me a couple of books, and that's what got me started. I looked around on the internet. I found Rob Steiner. I found the Maria Thun biodynamic calendar, and other sources. And I've listed them so that you can go and take a look at them if you wish. All of these sources publish moon calendars. Some of them are print calendars, and some of them are apps. And the one I use most frequently is Moon and Garden, because it's free and I like free things. Maria Thun and Stella Natura both put out print calendars that you can order. I think they're available easily, selling either on Amazon or on their own websites. And the bottom three, the Moon and Garden, the BD Garden, and Pleine Lune, are apps that are available, and two of them are free. One of them is paid. The paid one is the BD Garden. It's probably the most accurate in terms of moon positions and everything, but I find it to be a little cumbersome in terms of utilization, because not everything is on the same page. I like Moon and Garden because the calendar is it's pretty, it's it's colorful, and it's easy to read. So I think I have on the next slide a picture of that. Okay, I think I've already told you about that. I just want to emphasize the fact that the calendar is a guide. and I don't obsess about precise timing, and I haven't yet utilized the biodynamic preparations, but I do import some biodynamic compost from a Malibu farm. So I add that into my compost, and I'm hoping that that sort of seeds it and helps it, because I haven't yet, studied the methods of preparation of these things, and they're a little bit difficult to do. So I'll hopefully will, as I become a better moon gardener, I will venture into using horn silica and horn manure. These are things that you have to prepare according to the moon and bury in the ground and wait for a season and then pull out and use in very small amounts. So I haven't done that yet. But I think my garden does need a little boost sometimes. And I'm looking at some of these preparations and studying them. And I can't tell you yet about them because I haven't used them. So the whole concept, the whole system of moon gardening is based on the sidereal lunar month. There are 2 lunar cycles that we look at. The synodic lunar month is defined by the visible phases of the moon, and it's the position of the moon in relation to the sun that defines that. And all what you see is the shadow from the sun and the interplay of the sun and the moon. It's the moon's shadow. It doesn't have anything to do really with the earth. Now, I cannot say that there is no influence of the full moon, because as a physician, I've noticed what happens in emergency rooms. But I think that the full moon has more of an effect on people than on plants. I think that plants are mostly asleep at night, and that the nighttime shining of the moon is not really what is essential to their development. So the sidereal lunar month, which is what is defining the calendar that we're going to look at, is defined by the position of the moon in relation to the zodiac. And it's as the moon passes in front of the different zodiac constellations, it is felt that it transmits different influences, which are transmitted to different types of plants. And so you can see from the orbit of the moon what you start from a new moon where you don't see the moon at all, and you go through the quarters of the moon to the full moon. What's interesting, I'll take the next slide, please. These are the visible phases of the moon, and that's what we see, but it's really more of an optical illusion than any real physical phenomenon. What influences the type of gardening that I do is really the fact that the moon's orbit is tilted. And the moon's orbit is tilted by 5 degrees in relationship to the orbit of the Earth. Next slide, please. So these 5 degrees of the separation make it so that during half of its cycle, the Earth is actually getting a little further away from the sun. I mean, the moon, sorry, the moon is moving further away from the Earth. And during the other half of the cycle, the moon is moving closer to the Earth because of the tilt of the orbits. So as it's traveling through its orbit, it will ascend in the sky for 2 weeks, and then it will descend in the sky for 2 weeks. As it's traversing the zodiac, it also is reflecting or transmitting specific impulses from the different constellations. And so what this is really astrology for plants. The constellations of the zodiac are divided into 4 elements, right? We all heard of them: earth, wind, fire, and water. The plants can be divided into 4 categories according to the part that you're cultivating them for. They all have these 4 parts, but if you are cultivating for fruit, you want to plant and care for fruit-bearing plants in front of fire constellations. So at the time when the earth, so these four categories each correspond to elements. The root development is under the influence of earth constellations. The stems and the leaves are influenced by the water constellations. Flower development is under the influence of air constellations, and fruit and grain formation is under the influence of the fire constellations. So these are the astrological signs that correspond to the constellations, but it's not gardening by the month that corresponds to that astrological sign. Okay, it's gardening by when the moon is passing in front of that particular constellation and transmitting those forces down to the earth. This is the Moon and Garden calendar, which I find so useful. It's an old page, but it will, each day will show you whether it's a fruit day or an earth or a root day or a flower day or a leaf day. So what I think the purpose and the event, what you get into is you get into the rhythm of nature. You have 2 weeks when the moon is ascending and 2 weeks when the moon is descending pretty much every month. So you get 2 weeks to sow and to tend to above ground things, and 2 weeks to plant and tend to soil and below ground things. The calendars will give you specific advice and very useful reminders. And it also helps that basically your tasks are broken down and you're dealing with 1/4 of your garden at a time. It takes a lot of worry out of my brain, and it gives me a very easy framework that I can just plug in my activities into. There are also days when you should not garden that are marked with these, red crosses on the calendar. And those days correspond to apogee, the apogee, the perigee, or lunar knots. And those are times when the influence of the moon is either too strong because it's too close to the earth, or too far because it's too far away from the earth, or it has crossed the ecliptic of the plane of the earth in a certain way, and those are called lunar knots, and those are also not good days to garden. This is just the BD garden, which is really, I think, the most precise calendar, but I don't happen to like the interface. I like the other one better. Not everything is on one page, whereas everything on the other calendar. Can we go back one slide so I can show you that it shows you whether the moon is ascending? The arrow on top will show you whether the moon is ascending or descending. And then it will also show you the constellation that the moon is in front of. So everything is right there. I find that to be a really easy interface. So this is what the Maria Thun printed calendar looks like. It's more complex, has a lot more information. If you're into astrology, you can get a lot more details about really what's going on with the moon, but it's not important to the planting. So this depends on what your interests are and what is going to work best for you. Okay, so my philosophy of gardening has been influenced by all of these the natural gardening, which was the birth of organic gardening, French intensive gardening that I talked about, incorporating native plants and increasing diversity. And I've been studying biodynamic gardening. Luckily for me, the Rudolf Steiner School of Agriculture is not that far. It's in Sacramento, and I can shoot up there and go listen to a seminar for a day and come back. So I've gone up there a couple of times, and I hope that I'll be able to make some more of their lectures. And I studied permaculture under Larry Santoyo at the Permaculture Academy in Los Angeles, and is really an inspiring teacher and a mentor. So I think that, you guys know more about permaculture than I do. I'm not really, but my philosophy of gardening and of living is really influenced by permaculture, and I really admire the principles of permaculture, which I've listed on the next slide. And those I try to not just apply to my garden, but to apply to my life as well, and to try and really utilize each of those concepts to get the best yield out of the garden. So in planting my garden, I have really tried to utilize the permaculture planting design. And I took my permaculture class with Larry Santoyo in 2015, which was the year that we had the drought, a really severe drought in Los Angeles. And everybody was just letting things die. But I learned that in times of drought, you should plant trees. And so I let the little things die and planted some trees to start creating the canopy. And then the next year I was able to put in some smaller shrubs underneath, and then fill in more and more as I planted. I am going to put in a swale. That's my project for this year, because I think that it will fit in where my the border of the garden, which is not irrigated and is doing fairly well, but I would like to see it more lush. So I want to bring in a little bit more water. So I'm going to put in that the berm and the swale and berm in front of the border of the garden, and hopefully get a little bit more vegetation growing. So I wanted to show you how I started. This is my first garden bed. As you see, it's about, maybe 10 by 20 feet. And that's where I started growing my peas and my lettuce. And that first garden bed really gave me enough vegetables to feed not just myself, but to feed some of my neighbors. And so it not only got me a little healthier, but it started my journey back to community by just these small exchanges that were made, and these small contacts of bringing community together. If I had too much lettuce, I'd bag it up and drop it off on people's doorsteps. And so people would talk about, who dropped the lettuce off. So it wasn't just conversation between me, but conversation between my neighbors. I was out there and people would stop and talk to me, and that created a spark of life. And slowly but surely my depression lifted, and I, found my way back to happiness. So I started very, very small and just made small adjustments. As you see my pots, I used my pots to extend my garden and to make it come. Each time that the pots created underneath a dead zone of grass, I moved the pots a little further onto the grass and then clear a little bit more and keep on going. So I'll show you, just keep. Oh, I do want to, before I show you the pictures of the garden and the evolution, I want to show you what really convinced me, because I'm a scientist. So it took convincing beyond the undeniable pull of the garden. The rhythm, and the fact that the rhythm became instinctive. Now I just don't really need to look at the calendar. It's become intuitive. I know, I feel when I wake up and I'm like, flowers. Or, oh yeah, I need some carrots. And it's amazing. The first couple of times it happened, I was like, oh, this is a coincidence. But as I've gotten more into it, it just becomes really instinctive and becomes intuitive. And not only that, I've become a healthier and happier person. The garden has generated abundance. It's created a whole community. I have students coming to the garden now. I have children who come to the garden to play. And so the happiness part is really convincing, but also there was a little experiment which convinced me, which I call my Luna tomatoes. And it was also fairly accidental. I'll take the next slide, please. When I was learning how to garden, I went to several places, one of which is the Learning Garden in Venice, which is run by a friend. And he was doing a class on tomatoes, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go to David's class on tomatoes. And I went, and it was wonderful. I had already planned what day I was going to sow my seeds on. It was the week after his class. So I was like, oh, this is great. I'll go to the class, I'll get all the tips. I already have my seeds, and I'll get started. When we were at the class, he gave us some seeds, which we started, showed us how to seed the plants. And I came home with a 6-pack of, seeded tomatoes, which I put on my little shelf that I had prepared and proceeded to, I waited until the next week to start the rest of the tomatoes. And this is what I got. On the left side, you see the tomato plants from the Learning Garden, which were started a week earlier, and the tomato plants sown a week later. Now, I call that convincing. And I'll take it to the next slide. Those tomato plants grew and outperformed the ones that David gave me. There was like no doubt about it. And at the end of our permaculture class, we created the garden as an exercise for some people. And this is the garden that grew in 6 months. This is the before and this is the after, planted by the moon. We used artichokes for a hedge. These people had so many artichokes in the first season of planting that they got sick of artichokes. So I'm convinced that this works for me, and that's the way I'm gardening from now on. The garden is really my also my journey to sustainability and to living a more conscious life. So I am really trying to decrease the outside financial imports to the garden. And so this is my efforts towards sustainability, what the garden needs and what the garden brings to me. The garden needs a lot of compost and fertilizer, seeds, plants, water, and a lot of labor. But in turn, what it has brought is, so much more than the input that it's immeasurable. So I had an interesting, because my garden is out, there's no fence. By necessity, it's a garden that everybody has access to. And because of the journey of gardening had brought me close to my neighbors, it was, instinctive to say, please take what you want. Just anybody can pick and take what they want. And it was very frustrating to find that nobody took me up on it. So, oh no, we couldn't. Oh, really? Oh no. If I didn't physically do it myself, nobody took anything from the garden unless I chopped things down and went and gave them to people. I grew tiring, or I grew a little tired of it. And I said, well, maybe if I ask people to bring me something, maybe then they'll feel entitled to take something from the garden. And it wasn't so much that I needed the compost at first, but it was just a way to try and engage the community in an exchange. And because I was frustrated that nobody was taking me up on my offer of free vegetables, and everything was just staying on the vines and rotting and getting buggy. So I put out a bin, and people started bringing eggshells and coffee grounds and juice pulp. And this is LA, this is the land of juicing. People juice all day long. So then people started saying, oh, okay, since I'm bringing something, I can take. So I have regulars who juice, and they come and pick their kale from my garden, whatever's available, I'll put in the bins. People will bring it, whatever they bring, I just I put into my compost bin, and that's feeds the garden. So the that's how things started. And then one of the people that I handed a bunch of kale to one day, who had stopped by to say, "Oh, I love your garden." And I was like, "Here, take some kale." She came back and she said, "Well, why don't you start teaching? Why don't you teach a class?" And so I did that, and that was really, really fulfilling. That was wonderful. That was my first class. Unfortunately, as this was happening, my back problems were getting a little bit worse, and I had to have another surgery. And so I took a hiatus from teaching, but I'm getting a lot better back in physical therapy, and I've actually been given the okay to garden again. So I'm a happy camper. I'm happy to say that my garden didn't suffer during the 3 months that I couldn't garden, because my entire community rallied around me, and they took care of the compost bin. They took care of the watering the vegetables and the parts of the garden that are not irrigated. It was absolutely wonderful. This is the community that supported me through my illness. They brought me food every day. They walked my dogs. They took care of me. And this is really all because of the garden. If I had not stepped out there and started this garden and started sharing from the garden, I would have had the same experience from my very last surgery before, where I endured this entire thing all by myself. And so I am so grateful to my garden and to my community, and really grateful to you guys as well for having me and letting me tell you my story. So this is my food exchange, and every day is almost like a birthday, because as I walk out there, whether it's just a bag of eggshells or some coffee grounds or a bunch of juice pulp, there's a present for me in a bin. And people, when they heard that I was sick, were so generous. They left fruit, they left presents. People brought me wine and gifts. It's the garden that keeps on giving. It's really absolutely wonderful. This is how I compost with the eggshells and the coffee grounds. I just dump everything in a bin. I put some compost and some leaves on there, the dried grass that my gardener cuts and leaves right besides me. I just cover everything with that. And so it layers and layers. When the bin is full, I just toss it and side dress a different bed or a different part of the garden, and basically mulch compost with that. I've also started vermicomposting. Next slide, please. I don't know why there was a picture on there, but and I harvested my first layer of worm compost, and I'm using that to feed my vegetables. In terms of pest management, I really stay away from pesticides. The only thing I've used is neem oil for the past few years. Neem oil, peroxide, baking soda, all of those things. But also I've invested in some row covers and use those and some hoops. Very easy to make garden hoops, by the way. I use the pool tubing that is easily bendable, and you can cut with scissors, and you just plant two little bamboo stakes, and you arch that over it. And don't buy garden hoops, please. Okay, go to your hardware section and find things that you can utilize. So just to go over this is the framework that I use for gardening. When the moon is ascending, I sow, I graft or harvest above ground vegetables and flowers. When the moon is descending, you transplant, you work the soil, you put in your amendments, and you harvest the root type vegetables. It helps to sort your seeds out into the 4 categories of plants. that helps you to know which seeds to sow when, and really emphasize the saving of seeds, because that's how you really grow vigorous vegetables, is by getting the seeds that adapt to your soil. So the plants that are going to, if you save your seeds, there's not all seeds that can be saved, but you save whatever seeds you can save. It gives you a boost on the next season, because those plants have already been in that environment and they're ready to go. Whereas, you're getting your seeds the first time, you have to get them from the store. But if you don't have to, you're really doing yourself a favor by getting your seeds, because you're going to end up with more vigorous plants that are better adapted to your soil. So if you remember, on the calendar, there were these no gardening days, right? That were crossed out in red. And what should you do on no gardening days? I'll tell you, you should do as little as possible, because those days are not good for, if they're not good for plants, they're actually not good for you. And I found this out the hard way, because as I was busy in my garden, I would say, oh, no gardening day, I can do everything else. And so I would say, oh yeah, I'm going to do banking. And every time I attempted something that was complicated, it was an absolute disaster. I just couldn't get anything done, and didn't take too many attempts before I said, maybe I should rest. And so on those no gardening days, you rest your mind and your body. You do not attempt complicated tasks. And you sit your ass down, you read, you journal, and you dream, and you let your body recuperate. Your body needs it, just as the plants need it, just as the earth needs it. You need days of rest. And that's what I'm talking about, getting into healthy cycles. It really helps you, because otherwise, if I didn't look at the moon calendar, I wouldn't know this was not a good day to do complicated things. So I'll just take you, we can just go through these really fast, okay? Just click on them. This was my first vegetable. And then, since I was still into pretty gardens and mostly flowers, this was my cottage garden next. And this is the garden as it is evolving, with my pots going down the lawn and killing the lawn little by little. After I took my permaculture class, I realized I needed to go a little faster. So I got some help and cardboarded and mulched. And then really, that's when the garden got going. Next, I also moved the vegetables eastward and southward progressively as I was learning. And then I moved my herb garden closer and closer to my front door. So this is a Three Sisters patch that you can see growing. And so utilizing permaculture principles and lessons from our ancient elders, Native Americans, that showed us how to do this. You can see how lovely and how happy the corn, the squash, and the beans, you can probably see them intertwined somewhere in there, are doing. So it's really brought so much abundance to my life. I never have to buy flowers. I rarely am without a gift that I can take to someone's house on the spur of the moment. If a friend is sick, I go to my garden, I pick herbs for tea and deliver, baskets of food. And it's just living from the garden is just wonderful. And the next. So this, with the arrival of my grandson, the garden has changed even more. We've created a play area for children. It's open to the neighborhoods, and the children come and play. I don't come out. I just listen from inside, but it still brings me joy to see them. They come with the parents come, they can sit, they play. I leave paints and canvases and paper and different kinds of things out. And it's just wonderful to know nobody has taken anything from my garden, except one time a bird bath and a little side table. And it was so, ridiculous. I was like, well, if you need it, you're welcome to it. So that's my philosophy. This is my teaching class, and we're really trying to open the garden up to more activities, to do painting in the garden and storytelling for the children. So as COVID recedes and we can really engage more, I'm hoping that some of these activities will resume. I've already told you about the sharing garden, and I'm just really happy that it really works. These are the things that I get, and how it feeds me. And this is my friend Petey the blue jay, who comes and eats peanuts from my garden. I also use all the flowers and herbs to infuse oils and create balms and skin products that we use. And I really try to pretty much not buy any of that stuff anymore. And I've been able to generate enough to, send to my family at Christmas time. And so it's really made me very happy to be able to generate things and to make things that I can then gift to people. This is what I really call the benefits of living by the moon, is an enhanced well-being and a better ability to self-regulate and respond to stress, because I'm not going to be out there trying to kill myself on a day when it's not it's not propitious, it's not good to garden. So I eat better. I'm continuing to grow both in understanding and hopefully in wisdom, and really have started to schedule other activities by the moon, my haircuts, doctor's appointments. And in order to do that, there's a very helpful website that's called rhythmofnature.net. And you can go on there and they have different sections, and it will tell you what are good days to cut your hair and to go to the dentist or whatever. So I'm finding that to be helpful, and planning my surgery. I paid attention to the lunar calendar. I consulted someone who had recently done a chart for me, and I'm happy to say that everything went absolutely fabulously well. I mean, this was the smoothest experience of surgery that I've had in my life, and this was my fourth really serious surgery. So I recommend it highly. I have a little garden tour for you. So get started. Yeah, just so you can take a look around. There should be some sound to it. I don't hear the sound.
Can you hear it now?
Yes. The garden has grown so much that you can barely see the house from the street anymore. Put in a lot of fruit trees through the drought season, and now they're starting to fruit. I have nectarine, mango, guava, plum, papaya, and I put in a cherry moya tree that hasn't fruited yet, but you have to pollinate it. So I will do that next year. You can see this is the outside border, which is not irrigated at all. And it produces artichokes with very little water. So. And then with the help of Ron Finley, the gangster gardener who helped change the laws in Los Angeles, we're now able to plant in the parkways. So I've started planting citrus in the parkway. So and I just want to leave you with one last thing. Next, please. This is one of the teachings from my teacher, Larry Santoyo, which I really think is important in achieving what you desire, to not just desire the goal, but to create the conditions for what you desire. And I think that that's what the garden does. It's just that you go and you create and you prepare soil, you put the plants, and then the abundance comes. So that's what I do. And I hope that you guys can maybe try it for yourselves and see if you enjoy it and if it brings you a sense of well-being as well.
Oh, Chantal, I'm not gonna lie, I could listen to you talk for the rest of the day. I love your spirit and energy, and it just comes through so beautifully, and your passion in your work. So thank you for sharing with
Thank
us.
you.
I have a
Thank
few
you.
questions for you, if you don't mind.
Yes, not at all.
You had talked about this flower shortage, and it's funny because I live on a retreat center, and there actually is a flower shortage right now. It's hard to buy flowers, which is so funny because walking out in the garden, it's like literally this abundance of flowers all around us. And it's
Yeah.
such a great reflection of how being connected to nature creates this abundance of flowers. And yet in this disconnected consumerist world, it's actually hard to buy a flower right now. So
Wow.
I wanted to talk to you about your experience as a physician and in the health world, and now into this interconnected moon gardening gardener world. Have you seen how has your stance on health shifted from
Absolutely.
those? Oh.
Yeah. No, I think that as a physician, I was certainly brainwashed by my profession. I'm not anti-medicine. Okay, I can appreciate that we need to have interventions at times. I'm certainly so grateful for the surgery that has healed my back. I think medication is helpful at certain times. I think that unfortunately, the pharmacological and insurance industries have taken over and have polluted the world and the minds of physicians. And that they are now in control of the healthcare industry in the United States, and they control the access, the delivery, and what you get. And that was a major difficulty for me in practicing medicine. So when I said that I was fairly happy practicing medicine, there were lots of things about medicine that did not sit well with me. The inequity of the delivery of healthcare, the access was just ridiculous. I refused, and I was not a very good partner in my practice because I treated everybody the same, whether they could pay for it or not. The nurses knew and the doctors knew, and I lied my ass off on every form that I had to fill to justify whatever treatment I thought. But it did not sit well with me that I had to do that. It made me angry. It made me resentful. I hated the time that I had to spend on paperwork, lying. Oh, yes, I've given the patient this and this and this and this, because in the United States, everybody thinks that you should have the most expensive and the latest car model that you can access. When it comes to medication, the pharmacological industry has made sure that you can only access the old medications first, and only the rich people can have the new ones. If you can't pay cash out of pocket for $1,000 medication that they have decided to jack up the price on, then you're stuck with the old model. How is that ethical? How is that human? How is that healthcare delivery? It doesn't sit well with the people who are doing it. Physicians are suffering as well as patients are suffering. Nurses don't like it. We're all trying to scam the system to try and deliver adequate care to people. And a lot of times we're blocked in our attempts to do it. And that felt horrible. And I was so glad that I didn't have to do it anymore. It allowed me to regain my sense of integrity.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you back on our side of connectivity and hands in the soil warriors here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
One of my favorite parts of your speaking is the simplicity and just the cycles of work and rest and your intuitive nature that comes. And I see a lot of this reflected in the indigenous tribes. This is just old wisdom that we're opening ourselves back up to. So I really respect and love the fact that you're bringing this to our attention. Thank you.
My grandmother was the first one was the one whom I remember planting, cutting our hair by the moon. Well, I grew up in Haiti where we have parasitic infestations. We got dewormed by the moon. Children got potions to get rid of parasites, and she knew when to do it. And we all know as physicians, right, that children get itching around if they have ascaris, which is the pinworm, that they get the itching around the new moon, right? The worms are related to the cycles. My grandmother knew that in order to treat the worms and get the best treatment, you had to do it at this particular time. If you want your hair to grow, then you cut it at a certain time. If you don't want your hair to grow, then you cut it at another time. Okay, so
the tomatoes don't lie, right?
Tomatoes don't lie.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your work with Feed Black Futures, and could you share with us a little bit about that organization and your involvement?
Yes, I am trying to support an organization called Feed Black Futures, which was started by Allie Anderson, and you can look her up. She's really a wonderful organizer. The aim is to provide healthy food to and support families of incarcerated people. She started by delivering CSA kind of baskets to these families. She sources all of her food from people of color, from farms that are owned and operated by people of color. And now we are trying to start building raised bed gardens for the families that have a little space and that are interested. And so that's really what I would like any financial support that comes my way to be funneled towards that organization.
Well, thank you so much for being a voice in this work. Your spirit just fills me with inspiration, and I'm really grateful that you were able to come here and share it with us today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for being here.
I want to invite everybody to continue this conversation by meeting us in our Sustainable Kashi Facebook group. There's a post there now, and you can pose questions for the speaker, and we can take the conversation further and really get some work done. I want to thank Amy Zelt for doing all the production, making all this happen, her work with the slideshow. You've been wonderful, and thank you for making this happen. Chantal, thank you. And thanks to all the people who have joined us today. Without your donations, your support, we wouldn't be here without you. So thank you very much. I love to explore our connection with the universe. The butterfly effect is this phenomenon where a small localized change in a complex systems can have large effects somewhere else, like a butterfly flaps its wings and it could cause a typhoon on the other side of the planet. So I think as we dive into the mysteries of the universe and we try to engage in this sacred conversation with her, perhaps we can all enjoy the abundant harvest that we create together. So thank you all for being a part of this work, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. You're beautiful.
You're welcome. Thank you. Hope to meet you in person soon.
I look forward to it.